Hello everyone in CSC 121 Graphical Python Programming. Welcome to week 7. We're into some very interesting, neat things that you can do with PyQt5. Some of them may be familiar to you if you've taken C# or Visual Basic. And you get that material in those classes. So let's talk about one of the really neat widgets that we have available to us, or classes. It is called the Timer class. This is talked about in chapter 3 of your book. So what a timer does is it lets us run things in the background without locking up the GUI, the dialogue that folks see when they're running our application. These are very, very powerful little classes that let you do all kinds of stuff. Let me switch to a little graphic that I created so that we can talk about the way a GUI application works. All operating systems on computers have this loop that runs continuously in the background. You may have learned about this in CIS 110, where they talked about the CPU in your computer does a fetch, decode, execute loop over and over and over. The megahertz that is specified, or gigahertz, of your CPU in your computer is actually talking about how fast this loop is rolling over and over and over. So your operating system, your CPU, it has this built-in loop. When we start another application, especially a GUI application, we create another loop. And here I have in green, you'll notice it says app equals Q application. If you look at the code in our PyQt5 applications, you'll see down towards the bottom, you'll see this line in the code. This actually creates that application loop that we're talking about. So if you've ever wondered, how is it that you can display a dialogue and have all these buttons and other widgets on that dialogue, and they all can respond to the clicks and other things that we do in the application? Well, that's called the event loop for our application. So when you start a GUI application, behind the scenes, this green loop is started running, and it's sitting there watching for you to click a button or drop a combo box and click something. This loop is what makes you perceive the application to be running. If this loop that I have here in green gets hung up for some reason, or you do some task, maybe somebody clicks a button in this loop and that button does some long running task, if it doesn't do an application process events to turn control back over to our little green loop, you can get an hourglass that just sits there for a long time until something finishes. Folks that don't know what they're doing when they're writing these GUI applications, will write applications that appear to hang a lot. And I'm sure almost everyone that is using a computer with GUI apps has at one point or another had an application that hung for, you know, a minute or longer with an hourglass, and you couldn't click on anything. That's because they didn't write the application correctly so that it turned control back over to this green loop so that things could keep getting clicked. So when we start something running in the background, remember we were talking about the QTimer class? It actually creates another loop. So we have this outer blue loop that's running all the time. That could be Windows or Linux or whatever, Mac OS. It's sitting here running over and over and over, processing things. We start our little GUI application and this green loop starts running. Each time through this cycle, our little green loop gets to do its thing. And then if we start something running in the background of our little green PyQt5 application, we can do that with the QTimer. And so it'll sit here and run its own little loop in the background doing things. So this is the way that work gets done on the computer. And this is a key concept to the way GUI applications work. They all have this green application event loop that's running. And then you can start other things running in the background with things like a QTimer widget. So, and by the way, you can have more than one of these QTimers running, so you could be doing lots of stuff in the background while still allowing folks to click on things and do work in this green loop in our application. So these timers are really powerful. I worked for Central Carolina Bank, and I needed to download a file from 6,000 bank branches, and I had about an 8-hour window to get all 6,000 files downloaded to a server. Well, they had tried to write this before, and they were just using a script. Well, the script was copying the files one at a time, and it was taking 32 hours to finish. And they only had 8 hours at night to get this done. So I created a graphical application, and I put 16 timers on it. Each one of those timers would copy a file, so I could copy 16 files at a time simultaneously because I had all these timers running in the background. So that copy operation that I told you they tried to write was taking 32 hours to run. When I implemented it with the timer controls, 16 of them, it went down to taking 4 hours. So that's a huge difference, 32 hours versus 4. So that gives you an idea of how you can use the multitasking to do things. So let's implement a little program here in PyQt5 that uses the timer control. And this is kind of demonstrated in your chapter, in your textbook. They're doing this in chapter 3. The chapter is working with date and time. So let's throw something together with a LCD number widget, and you can see that we'll use a QTimer to actually get the time in the background and update our LCD number widget. Nice little widget in PyQt5. So I have already downloaded the GUI template.ui and the GUI template.py file, and they are already there in my folder that I've created for this. You can see it. I've created a folder on my flash drive called Numbers Demo, and I've got these GUI template and the GUI template.ui. So let's go in and modify this and save it as numbersdemo.ui. So I'm going to open it up with Qt5 Designer. First thing I'm going to do is go to File, Save As, and I'm going to save this as Numbers Demo. Numbers_demo.ui. Okay, so we'll save that. You can confirm the name right here, Numbers Demo. So let's put an LCD number widget, really nice little widget here. You see it in the display widgets part of the widget box. So I'm going to drag that up to our form here, our dialog. Okay, and going to move it around a little bit. Now you notice it named it LCD number, and I think that's okay for what we're doing, so we'll leave it LCD number. Now the properties that we might want to set are right here where it's talking about the QLCD number in our inheritance and properties over here. So first thing to know about this is you notice it's got a 0 showing there. Right now it's set to a digit count of 5, which is kind of a misnomer because if we're displaying hours and minutes, we'd have hours, hours, a colon, and minutes, minutes. That's 5 characters, but it's 4 numbers. So if you have a separator there, if you have a separator in this, the separator counts as one of your digits. So I want this thing to show hours, hours, colon, minutes, minutes, colon, seconds, seconds. So two digits for the hour, a colon, 2 digits for the minute, a colon, and 2 digits for the seconds. So did you catch that? How many numbers am I talking about? Well, I've got 6 numbers, but I also have 2 colons in there. So I'm going to change my digit count to 8. I hope that makes sense because we are going to have hours, hours, colon, minutes, minutes, colon, seconds, seconds. That comes up to 6 numbers and 2 colons. 6 plus 2 is 8. Now, you'll get some questions on your homework probably about this. There are different modes for the LCD display. So you could display hexadecimal, you could display decimal, octal, or binary. So we're leaving ours set. I want a decimal clock. I don't want to try to figure out what that time is looking at binary. Okay? So we've got that taken care of. LCD number, push button, exit, so on. So I'm going to save this. Okay? So let's go create some code with a timer, and we'll have a running clock on our dialog here. So, okay, so I've got Numbers Demo UI here. There's the GUI template.py. Going to open that up with Tawny. There it is. Gonna go ahead and change my comments so that numbers demo, and gonna save this in exactly the same spot as my other UI file. So bear with me here while I work through my folders, get to my flash drive again, and my RCCC folder, 2020 spring, and module 4 numbers demo. This is where I'm going to save it as numbers underscore demo.py. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is change where we're importing that, or excuse me, loading that UI file. The UI file that has our LCD number widget on it is numbers underscore demo. Okay, save that. And let's just check everything right now. It's always good to just make sure everything works before we go doing anything else. So there's our LCD number widget right there. Okay, and you notice it's not running yet. That's because we haven't gone out and gotten the time at a certain interval and worked with that. So let's get started with working with this timer. So first thing we've got to do is we need to add an import so that we can get to the timer class. So I'm going to add another import here from PyQt5 QT GUI, excuse me, just from PyQt5, import QT core. This is where the timer class is. Okay, so we've got that imported. So let's go ahead and create ourselves a timer. So in our constructor, this is our constructor right here, we'll add a few things. So timer LCD is what I'll call my timer, equals QT core dot QTimer. Got to pass self to it. Okay, all of our widgets need a reference to self. Okay, next let's connect the timer's timeout signal. Now let's talk about what a timeout signal is. This little timer, remember that loop that we were talking about? This loop that we're creating right here? This loop will get awakened at some interval. We can tell it how often to wake up and run this little red loop. So when that loop wakes up and runs, a signal is emitted. The signal is the timeout signal. So we're going to connect that just like we connected the click signal from a push button. We're going to connect the timeout signal from our timer to a method. So timer LCD dot timeout dot connect, and this is going to be the method that we'll update our little LCD display widget. Okay, so we're going to write this method just like we would write a method for a clicked signal. Okay. And lastly, we need to tell it how often to wake up. Remember the little red loop? We're going to tell it how often to wake up and do that. So we'll start it running. And this is milliseconds. Milliseconds. Wake up every 1,000 milliseconds. What's 1,000 milliseconds? 1 second, right? So every second, our timer will wake up and run this method that we're going to write. How often would the seconds tick on our clock? Every second, right? So let's go write that code now to update our LCD display so that we can see that work. It's not a whole lot of code either to make this work. So pretty nice actually. So right here we're going to create another method for our class, def, and we called it show LCD is what we're connecting to right here. So show LCD. Remember, it's got to get a reference to self. Okay. And first let's get the time. Okay. So PyQt5 has some really neat methods built in to get and work with the time being the computer time. So time equals Qt core dot QTime dot current time. That's going to retrieve the current time. Next, we're going to format that time into a time string, time.toString. This is where we'll tell it we want hours, hours, colon, minutes, minutes, colon, seconds, seconds. So this is going to format the time that we just retrieved in this format, and then we'll have a string that has that in it called text, and all we've got to do now is self.ui.lcd number. That was our timer widget, hopefully. Let's look. LCD number. See where I'm getting at? Okay. So we'll go back. Here's Tawny. Self.ui.lcd number.display. And we'll tell it what to display. Okay. So we have started the timer here inside the constructor. So the moment our UI gets loaded and its green event loop, when our constructor starts our UI, this green loop is going to crank up. It's going to be running to process all of our clicks and other events that happen or signals. So once that happens, then we start the timer, and this red loop will wake up and run every 1,000 milliseconds, or in layman's terms, every second. And it's going to run in the background. So that's what's going on. we have cranked it up right here in our constructor. So let's save our code and run it. We should have a dialog with a running clock that updates every second. Okay, there it is. It's ticking away. You see the 25, 26, 27. So those digits are there ticking away in the background. Okay? We could go in here and make this a little bit bigger. Okay? So you can see, and we can format this right here. We could change our font just like we could with other things. So a good font to use might be Arial. That's on most computers. So I'm going to change my font to just Arial, regular. And let's bump it up to about a 14-point font and see how it looks. Okay, and we can make it bold. Okay, so let's see how that looks now when it's running. So we'll save our UI here and run it again. A little bit better. Not real crazy about the light colored digits there, but you get the point. So you can see it running there in the background. 16:33 and 12 seconds, 14, so on. So that's our little timer that we created. Right here is where we created the timer LCD. It's got its own little loop that's running in the background. You can see that we can still do other things. Our program is not hung up in any way. This is waking up and doing its thing. We can still click our exit button and everything works like it's supposed to. So we'll come back and modify this program to show some more concepts. So that's the end of part 1. There'll be